The wind carried the smell of dust and pine across the foothills that evening, the kind of quiet hour when the world held its breath before darkness settled in. Folks along the frontier said days out here could be rough, but nights carried their own kind of danger. It's a kind that slipped into a person's bones. That was the hour she arrived, tired and shaken, riding in the back of an old wagon headed toward a land she had never seen, toward people she had never met, and toward a fate she had never chosen. She kept her hands close to her chest as if holding her heart in place, trying not to look frightened, though fear was the only thing keeping her upright. The ridge ahead glowed warm under the sinking sun, and every slow turn of the wagon made her stomach twist. She knew the men leading the horses had already traded her away earlier that afternoon. She had heard the words, spoken plain and simple, like she was a sack of grain or a piece of iron being bartered off. Sold to a young Apache man no one seemed to know much about except one strange thing, the traders whispered with a smirk. They said he was a virgin. They said it like it meant something more than she understood, like they expected a story to grow out of it. She lowered her eyes and prayed they had been lying. The horses stopped at a small clearing where a lone fire burned, steady and controlled. A tall figure stood beside it, the shadows stretching long behind him. His posture was firm yet calm, as if he had been waiting there for hours without moving. She saw only the outline of his broad shoulders and long dark hair falling down his back. He didn't step forward or speak. He simply watched her. And even from the wagon she felt the strength in his silence. One of the traders climbed down and motioned her ahead. She hesitated, clutching what little belongings she had left. The trader gave her a push, not harsh but impatient, as though he wanted this done quickly. She stepped down, boots touching the dirt, feeling the weight of every eye on her. She wanted to cry, but something inside her hardened instead. She stood straighter than she felt. Holding her chin higher than her fears allowed, the trader nodded toward the tall Apache man. "She's yours now." Those were the last words the men spoke before collecting their coins and turning the wagon around without another glance. The sound of the wheels rolling away faded into the trees until she couldn't hear them anymore. The clearing became still, so still she could hear her own breath trembling. The young Apache didn't rush toward her or make any threatening move. Instead, he stepped slowly into the light of the fire. She saw his face clearly for the first time. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, deep-set eyes that seemed to catch every flicker of the fire. But there was something else in his expression, something unexpected. Not cruelty, not desire, not the wild hunger the traders had hinted at. What she saw was hesitation. He looked almost as unsure as she felt. He picked up her small bundle of belongings from where it had fallen and handed it back to her with gentle care. His hands were steady, warm, and respectful. She wasn't expecting that. It made her heartbeat stumble for a moment. He finally spoke in a low voice. "You are safe here." The words didn't erase her fear, but they settled something inside her. She had expected commands or mocking remarks or silence that felt cold. Instead, his tone carried a quiet strength. As if he meant every syllable, he motioned for her to follow him to a small shelter built near the edge of the clearing. It wasn't much, but it was sturdy, with thick branches woven together and animal hides tied to the walls to block the cold night air. She stepped inside, unsure of what to expect next. The Apache man remained at the entrance, still not coming too close. She looked around and saw a bed of woven blankets on one side, freshly laid out as if someone had prepared the place for her. A small clay bowl held warm water, and beside it was a folded piece of cloth for washing. These small touches surprised her more than anything. They were signs of welcome, not ownership. Outside, the fire cracked softly, and she could hear him settling down beside it. He wasn't following her in. He wasn't watching her like she was trapped prey. He wasn't reaching for her or demanding anything. She sat on the blankets, hands trembling lightly. The night pressed in around them, carrying the sounds of crickets and distant wolves. But inside the shelter, she felt something she hadn't felt since morning. A hint of safety. A quiet space where no one was yelling, bargaining, or judging her worth. She listened to the fire crackle and wondered what kind of man he really was. Traders always twisted stories to suit their pockets. They had laughed about him being a virgin, but now she realized how wrong their tone had been. It wasn't something he bragged about, nor something that gave him power. If anything, it made him different from what they expected. More careful, more aware, she lay back on the blankets for a moment, letting her shaking muscles rest. But her mind refused to settle. She wondered what would happen when the fire burned lower and the cold night deepened. When the silence grew too thick, when the truth of their new bond would press against them. Would he come in then? Would he reach for her? Would he claim what he had paid for? That fear returned again, heavy and cold. The flap at the shelter's entrance rustled lightly. She sat up, stiff with caution. He didn't step inside. He only held out a wooden cup filled with warm herbal tea. She took it with trembling fingers, surprised yet again by his thoughtfulness. He spoke softly, not looking directly at her. "You rest. Tomorrow, you will understand more." That puzzled her. Understand what? Understand him? Understand why he bought her? Understand what he expected from her? Before she could ask, he stepped back and sat near the fire again. He seemed determined to stay outside, giving her space as though he knew she needed it. That single decision made her breath hitch. It wasn't what she had feared. It wasn't what the traders had hinted at. It wasn't what she had braced herself for all day. She lay down again, gripping the blankets, eyes fixed on the dim glow cast by the fire through the gaps in the shelter wall. Her thoughts tangled tighter with every passing minute. She didn't know this man, didn't know his heart or his intentions. Yet something in the way he moved and spoke stirred questions she couldn't quiet. She felt exhaustion pulling on her. Heavy and slow, but she forced her eyes to remain open. She wasn't ready to sleep, not yet. Not on her first night here. Not beside a man who had every right to walk into the shelter, but chose not to. The fire popped outside. His shadow shifted along the shelter wall. She saw him glance toward her one last time before lowering his head to rest. Something about that simple act stole her breath for a moment, leaving her chest tight and confused. Why was he treating her this way? What was he waiting for? And what was she supposed to expect when morning came? Before she could untangle her thoughts, a sudden rustle in the trees made them both lift their heads at the same moment, the night growing still again, as if warning them that something unseen had stepped into their world. The quiet didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them was prepared for. The sound that broke through the trees that night lingered in her mind long after it faded. It wasn't loud, not enough to send a warning across the valley, yet it carried a sharp edge that made her sit upright on the blankets. The Apache man lowered his hand slowly toward the knife resting near his knee, though he didn't reach for it all the way. He listened first. He always listened before acting. She watched him through the narrow opening of the shelter, studying the steady rise and fall of his breath and the alert line of his shoulders as he turned, his head toward the dark woods. No danger showed itself. No figure stepped forward. No animal snapped a twig again. Yet the uneasiness hung between them, crawling into the quiet of the night until her heartbeats sounded too loud in her own ears. It was the first time she realized that whatever life waited for her here, it was tied to a land full of hidden threats she didn't know how to read. He seemed to understand them all without needing a word. She envied that calm certainty. When the night finally settled back into stillness, he shifted his posture and looked toward the shelter. His eyes met hers for a moment, not long, just enough for her to feel he had noticed her fear even though she tried to hide it. He didn't ask if she was all right, didn't stand to reassure her, but something in the way his gaze softened told her he understood more than he spoke. He let the fire burn down on its own, as if trusting the night to hold its own balance. She stayed awake longer than she intended, her mind circling through questions that had followed her all day. Who was he really? Why had he come alone to meet the traders? Why did someone like him choose to buy her? The traders had spoken about him as if he were only defined by one thing: a virgin. But he didn't carry himself like a boy unsure of the world. He moved with the calm steadiness of someone raised to protect what mattered. As the hours passed, her exhaustion finally won. She drifted into sleep without noticing when her eyes closed. When morning light crept in, painting the shelter in pale gold, she woke to the faint smell of roasted herbs and warm bread. Her chest tightened with confusion. Bread was not something traders prepared for someone in her position. She sat up quickly. Outside, the young Apache knelt beside the fire, carefully turning a small loaf wrapped in leaves. Steam lifted into the air, carrying a scent far better than anything she had eaten in days. Her stomach growled loudly before she could stop it. He glanced toward her, but didn't smile or comment. Instead, he tore the loaf in half and held one piece out to her. She stepped out of the shelter slowly, uncertain of the rules here. He didn't pressure her, didn't rush her, simply waited with the same steady patience he seemed to show for everything. When she reached for the bread, she noticed how close his hands were to hers, warm and strong. She hesitated, then took it. She didn't eat right away. Her throat tightened again with the weight of everything she still feared. He noticed that too. He nodded toward the food gently. "You need strength," he said. His voice had that same calm tone, as if each word was carefully placed. She took a small bite, more to show she understood than because she was hungry. But once the first taste reached her tongue, she realized how badly she needed it. She finished the half loaf without speaking, and he waited until she was done before handing her a cup of warm tea. For a long moment they sat near the fire in silence. She listened to the wind brush through the trees and wondered what he expected from her now that the sun had risen. Was today the moment he would claim what he had bought? Or was he waiting for something else? She couldn't read his intentions, and that frightened her more than anything. He finally spoke, not looking directly at her. "Your old life is gone, but you will not be harmed here." The words hit her harder than he might have intended. The truth she had been avoiding crashed into her all at once. Her old life was gone. Her home, her people, everything familiar. Traded off without a choice. Sold as if she were nothing but a burden. She swallowed hard, gripping the cup with both hands. She wanted to ask why he bought her. Why he thought he had the right. But her voice felt locked behind fear. He must have sensed the storm inside her because he shifted his weight slightly and turned toward her, meeting her eyes without force. "You were not bought for cruelty," he said. "You were not brought here to suffer." She stared at him, searching for a reason to believe those words. His face revealed little, but his eyes held a kind of sincerity she hadn't expected. Even so, it didn't erase the fear completely. Words were one thing. Reality was another. He stood and motioned for her to follow. She hesitated but rose slowly. He led her toward a narrow path that wound up through the trees, the air filled with morning mist. She stepped carefully, still unsure of the land beneath her feet. As they walked, she noticed the quiet confidence in the way he read the forest, the way he paused to listen, the way he checked certain tracks in the dirt as if piecing together a story from the ground. He stopped near a ridge where the valley spread open below. From there she could see distant smoke rising from what must have been his village. Several small shelters dotted the edge of a river, connected by footpaths worn smooth by years of travel. Children's laughter carried faintly on the breeze. She hadn't expected that sound. It added a layer of humanity she hadn't known she needed. He pointed toward the valley. "My people live there. You will meet them when the time is right." She stared down at the village, nerves twisting inside her. Meeting his people meant stepping into a world where everyone would know the truth, that she wasn't there by choice, that she belonged to him now. Yet something about the peaceful scene below made her chest loosen. Just a little. They walked back to the clearing, and she noticed a new tension in his steps. He paused near the edge of the trees, studying footprints she hadn't seen before. His jaw tightened slightly. He crouched low and touched the ground. Someone had been near their camp during the night. He didn't say it aloud, but she could see the change in him. His shoulders stiffened, eyes narrowed. He rose slowly and scanned the woods with new caution. The uneasiness she felt last night returned with full force. He guided her back to the shelter, but didn't step inside. Instead, he handed her a small knife dull, but enough to offer some sense of protection. The gesture confused her. He was trusting her with it. He was giving her a way to defend herself if needed. She looked up at him, wondering why. "Stay inside," he said. "I will return soon." She watched him walk into the trees, moving with the silent focus of a hunter. Her breath tightened. The clearing felt too empty without him. The sounds of the forest grew louder, and every rustle made her grip the knife harder. She sat on the blankets, heart pounding. Her mind raced through every possibility. Who had approached their camp? Why now? Were they looking for him or for her? Was she safe only when he was near? Time passed slowly, each minute stretching longer than the last. She waited, listening for any sign of his return. The sky shifted from morning blue to a soft pale white. She pressed her back against the shelter wall, feeling the weight of uncertainty settling deeper into her bones, when a distant sound finally echoed through the woods. She couldn't tell if it belonged to him or someone else. Her breath caught, and she leaned forward, gripping the knife tighter. Whatever was coming toward the clearing wasn't moving quietly, and she had no idea who or what would step out of those trees first. The sound drew closer, clumsy and fast, snapping twigs and pushing past brush, as if whoever it was had no interest in hiding their trail. She rose to her feet without thinking, the dull knife clutched tight in her hand. Her breath came short and sharp. The shelter suddenly felt too small, the air too tight around her. Part of her wanted to run deeper into the trees. She knew the forest would swallow her whole before she knew which way was safe. A figure broke through the brush first. It was him. He stepped into the clearing in one smooth motion, chest rising and falling, eyes sweeping across the camp. Relief slammed into her so hard, her knees went weak, but it didn't last. Another figure stepped out behind him, older, broader in the shoulders, with gray threaded through long black hair. The second man's eyes were hard and sharp as flint. She could feel his gaze from where she stood. The young Apache saw her gripping the knife. His eyes flicked to it, then back to her face. He gave a faint nod as if to say he understood why she held it. He didn't look offended or angry, but the older man's mouth tightened. The older warrior spoke first in his own language, the words low and clipped. The younger one answered in the same tongue, his tone measured but firm. Their voices rose and fell like two different winds pushing against each other. She couldn't make out the meaning, but she understood argument when she heard it. The older man gestured toward her, and then toward the distant valley. His eyes never softened. Her heartbeat picked up again. Whatever they were saying, she knew she was at the center of it. At last the younger man turned toward her and switched to the language she understood. "This is my uncle," he said. "He does not like that you are here." The uncle looked at her as if she were a storm cloud rolling in over his land. Not a person, but a sign of trouble. "Why?" The words slipped out before she could stop it. Her voice sounded thin in the open air. The uncle answered in rough English, his accent strong, each word heavy. "White men bring guns, sickness, broken promises. A white woman traded like a calf means more trouble is already on the way." She swallowed hard. His words cut deeper than any insult the traders had thrown. He wasn't just angry at her. He was afraid of what she represented. The younger man kept his gaze steady. She was already in trouble, he said quietly. Left in their hands, trouble for her would be worse. The uncle snorted. "And now it is ours." They stood, facing each other, uncle and nephew, the fire between them like a line drawn in the dirt. She realized the main conflict here wasn't only between her and this new life. It was also between the young man's heart and his people's fear. The uncle stepped closer, standing so near she could see a pale scar along his jaw. "Girl," he said, "do you know why they sold you?" Her throat tightened. Memories rushed up, sharp and unwelcome. Her stepfather's eyes, cold and tired. The drought. The empty barn. The whispered talk of debts. She swallowed again. "My family owed money," she managed. "He said there was no other way. Said I was only making more mouths to feed." The uncle studied her expression, the way her hands shook in spite of her effort to hold them steady. Something in his gaze shifted, but only slightly. Like a door opening just a crack. "Men who sell their own blood," muttered, "are worse than those who buy them to save them." She blinked. "Save me?" Her question hung in the air. The young Apache's jaw tightened. For a moment he looked almost cornered, as if a truth he had tried to keep quiet had been dragged into the open. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to his uncle. More words passed between them in their own tongue, faster this time, with more heat. She caught none of it. Yet she could see the struggle in the lines of the younger man's shoulders. The uncle finally gave a sharp shake of his head and pointed toward the forest edge, where the tracks had been. "You followed the prince?" the nephew asked in English, as if wanting her to understand at least some of what was happening. The uncle nodded. "To men. Not from our people. Not from your traders. Boots like soldiers or drifters who camp near their fires. They watched this place and then moved toward the river." Her stomach turned. Someone had been close enough last night to see the fire, to see her. Perhaps close enough to hear their voices. She felt suddenly exposed, like the trees themselves were watching. "Why would they follow us?" she asked. The uncle studied her again. "Maybe they want you back. Maybe they want your buyer. Maybe they want to know why an Apache walks alone with a white woman in his camp. None of those reasons are good." The young man's eyes darkened with worry. He knew as well as his uncle that trouble could come from both sides. White settlers might think she had been taken against her will. Some of his own people might think he had brought a curse to their door. Either way, the valley below could feel the weight of that choice. He motioned her back toward the shelter. "Stay inside," he said. "We will talk more after." She didn't move. "After what?" "After we know who is stalking us," he answered. The uncle gave her one last measuring look, then turned on his heel and headed for the trees. The younger man followed, pausing only long enough to meet her gaze. There was something in his eyes now that hadn't been there the night before, a kind of quiet regret, a hint of worry for her, not just for himself. When they disappeared into the forest, the clearing fell silent again. She stepped back into the shelter, but she didn't sit. Instead, she paced, each turn stirring up more dust and more questions. The knife felt heavier in her hand now. She thought of how her life had been uprooted in a single day, sold by her own kin, delivered into strange hands, and now hunted by men who might be looking to drag her back or use her as an excuse for bloodshed. She pressed her hands against the rough walls of the shelter and remembered pieces of her past that she had tried to bury. Her mother's soft hands, the smell of bread baking in a small iron stove, the sound of a lullaby sung against the howl of prairie wind. All of that gone when sickness took her mother and hardship hollowed out her stepfather's soul. He had once been kind. She didn't understand how kindness melted into desperation so fast. She wondered if the young Apache knew anything about that kind of loss, about watching good things fade while bad choices grew like weeds. He held himself like a man who had lost much and was determined not to lose more. The minutes stretched, long and heavy. Through the cracks in the shelter wall, she watched the shadows shift as the sun climbed higher. Birds came and went. A squirrel darted close, then ran off again. Everything else seemed to stay just out of reach. At last she heard movement. But it wasn't the careful, watchful sound of the young man returning. It was lighter, quicker, followed by a small, uncertain voice. "You are the woman from the traders," the voice said. She turned sharply. At the entrance stood a girl, perhaps 12 or 13, with dark hair and 2 braids and bright, curious eyes. She wore simple clothes of soft buckskin and carried a woven basket against her hip. The girl glanced around the clearing, then slipped inside the shelter without waiting for an invite, as if she had every right to be there. "I am his cousin," the girl said proudly. "I came when I heard the men talk." "Talk about me?" the woman asked, startled. "About you, about him, about the men in the trees." The girl frowned. The elders worry. Of course they did. A white woman, a young Apache who went against tradition, and unseen stalkers near their valley. Worry made sense. "What do they say?" she asked quietly. The girl shrugged one shoulder. "Some say he should have left you with the traders. Some say he was right to take you away. Some say the soldiers will use you as a reason to ride into our land." "And what do you say?" the woman asked. The girl's eyes softened. I saw your face when you stepped down from the wagon. You looked like a bird with its wings tied. I do not like seeing someone's wings tied." The words touched something deep inside her. She had felt caged for so long she had nearly forgotten what it meant to think of freedom. The girl stepped closer and lowered her voice. "He is different from some of our warriors. He lost his sister when soldiers came. She was taken and never returned. Since then, he hates seeing any woman treated like a prize or a burden. When he saw you with the traders, he did not see property. He saw a chain." The woman's breath hitched. That one piece of truth explained more than all the arguments she had heard. He had not bought her for what everyone assumed. He had bought her because he could not bear to walk away. "Do the others know that?" she asked. The girl shook her head. "He does not speak of his pain. He thinks it makes him weak. But when I heard about you, I knew why he did it." They both fell quiet for a moment. Outside, the forest wind shifted, cooler now, carrying the smell of damp earth from somewhere far up the ridge. "Do you want to go back?" the girl asked, studying her carefully. "To the ones who sold you?" The woman closed her eyes briefly. The thought of returning to that wagon, that cold bargaining voice, that empty house, turned her stomach. Yet staying meant facing angry elders, dangerous strangers in the trees, and a future she had no control over. "I don't know what I want," she admitted softly. "I just know I don't want to be owned." The girl nodded slowly. "Maybe you will not be, if he has his way. But the path will not be easy." Before the woman could ask what that meant, a sharp whistle cut through the trees, high and urgent. The girl's head snapped up. "That is the signal," she said, fear flickering in her eyes. "Trouble is coming." She darted out of the shelter, leaving the woman alone with only the echo of those words. Trouble is coming. Heart pounding, the woman stepped to the entrance and looked out. On the far ridge above the valley, small shapes moved against the sky. Riders, too far to see clearly, but close enough to know they were real. A line of dust trailed behind them like a warning drawn across the land. The young Apache and his uncle emerged from the tree line at the same moment, both looking up at the ridge. The uncle's expression was grim. The young man's face went still, as if he were carving his fear into stone and hiding it away. He glanced toward her, their eyes locking across the clearing. The question she had asked in the quiet of last night returned with double force. Why had he treated her with such care when the world around them was tightening like a noose? The answer was tangled now with a new, larger question. The line of riders on the ridge did not move at first. They hovered their quiet silhouettes against the pale sky, watching the valley the way wolves study a herd before choosing where to strike. The young Apache stood in the clearing with his jaw clenched tight, eyes narrowing as he counted the shapes, one by one. His uncle muttered something under his breath, a warning or a curse, but the younger man didn't answer. He was already planning, already bracing for whatever might come crashing down the slope toward them. The woman felt her throat dry as sand. She could not see the riders clearly from where she stood, yet she felt the weight of their presence pressing against her ribs. The girl who had visited earlier ran back to warn the village trail, calling out to warn the others. Her voice carried far, echoing between the rocks and trees. The village now knew danger was perched above them. The young man finally stepped toward the woman. His strides long and controlled. He didn't look afraid, not exactly, but there was something sharper in his eyes than before. A tension pulled through him, stretching every line of his posture. "You must stay close," he said. She nodded, though her hands trembled. Her world had changed so quickly, pushed into danger she didn't understand. She had been sold like a burden, and now stood at the edge of a conflict she had no part in creating. It somehow was tangled inside. "Are they soldiers?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not soldiers, but they ride like men who want to send a message." The uncle approached with heavy steps. "We should take her to the village," he said. "If they come, they will come for the woman first." Her breath caught. "For me? But why?" The uncle's eyes were cold but honest. "'Cause men who ride like that don't come for trade or peace. They come to claim or destroy. A white woman in an Apache camp is reason enough for trouble. Then why don't I leave? She asked suddenly. Why don't I just run? They want me, not you. The young man stepped closer quickly, his voice low. You would not make it half a mile. They would find you before the trees swallowed you. And if they took you, they'd use your capture as a reason to bring more men here. More guns, more blood. His words sank deep. Running was not a way out. It was an invitation to worse things. He looked at his uncle. She goes to the village. I will speak with Chief Lone Tree. His uncle frowned. You know what he will say. I know, the young man answered, voice firm. But I must still speak. He turned toward the woman again. Come. She followed him down the narrow trail leading toward the valley. The forest felt tighter than before, the shadows thicker, as if the land itself sensed the tension building. Her feet stumbled over roots she couldn't see clearly. But he slowed his pace without complaint, staying just a few steps ahead of her. The quiet between them felt fragile, stretched thin by the weight of the approaching storm. As they descended, she heard distant shouts from the village. Some were frightened, others were angry. The presence of the riders on the ridge had spread like wildfire. She could picture the elders gathering, speaking in fast, tense voices, deciding what must be done with her and the young man who had chosen to buy her. When they reached the edge of the village, people stopped and stared. Women clutching baskets froze mid-step. Men tending to fires lowered their tools. Children hid behind their mothers' skirts, peeking out with wide eyes. She felt their stares pierce through her, not hateful, but wary. The way someone might look at a stranger who walked in carrying a storm cloud. The young man raised a hand. Most of the villagers relaxed slightly at the sight of him, though their eyes never left her. A few whispered to each other. One older woman made a sign of protection near her chest. A tall man stepped out from the largest shelter. His long hair was tied back, and strong lines aged his face. His presence alone quieted the murmurs around them. This was Chief Lone Tree. He approached slowly, eyes steady and unreadable. He studied her for a long moment before turning to the young man. You brought trouble to our valley, the chief said. I had brought someone who needed protection. The young man replied calmly. She brings trouble with her, the chief said, not by choice. The chief's gaze hardened. Choice does not matter to men on horseback. They will not ask who is guilty or innocent. They will only see her in our hands. The woman lowered her eyes, shame rising hot under her skin. She felt like a spark dropped in dry grass. One careless step, one wrong breath, and the whole valley could burn. Chief Lone Tree motioned for her to follow him to the shadow of a large cedar tree. She hesitated, then stepped forward. The air under the tree felt heavy, hushed, as if the branches were listening. Tell me, he said calmly, why you came here. She swallowed. I didn't choose to come. I was sold. Sold by who? My stepfather, she said softly. The chief's brows tightened. And the men who sold you to him, I don't know who they were. Traitors, drifters. The chief considered her words, then looked to the young man. You paid for her? Yes, he said. Why? The young man stayed silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried something raw, something he usually buried deep. My sister, he said quietly. She was taken by soldiers. They said they wanted help. Then they said she ran. She never came home. I could not let another woman be taken and traded like she was. The valley grew silent around them. Even the wind seemed to pause. Chief Lone Tree's stern expression softened, though just barely. You carry your sister's shadow, he said. But shadows cannot guide every choice. She is why I did it, the young man said. But I do not regret it. The chief looked at the woman again. Riders from the ridge will reach us by sundown. We must decide what to do before they arrive. Fear coiled inside her. Do they want to take me? Maybe, the chief said. Or maybe they want to know why an Apache bought a white woman. Or maybe they seek a reason to come against us. Whatever their purpose, it will not bring peace. She felt her knees weaken. What will you do with me? The chief didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, before nightfall, we will send a group to meet them halfway. The young ones cannot go. The old ones must stay. You two will stand before them. Together, the woman's heart pounded. You mean we must face them? The chief nodded. Better to meet danger in the open than let it ride straight into our homes. The young man placed a hand gently on her arm, steadying her. His touch was warm, grounding. You will not be alone, he said, but she wasn't sure if that comforted her or terrified her more. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of preparation. Warriors gathered supplies. Women brought blankets and water skins. Elders offered quick words of guidance. The girl with braids slipped into the shelter where the woman waited and handed her a soft shawl. For the cold, she said. Is it far? The woman asked. The girl nodded. Far enough to be dangerous, as the sun lowered in the sky, casting long shadows across the valley. The appointed group began forming at the edge of the village. The young man tightened the straps on his boots and checked the knife at his waist. His uncle joined him, holding a bow with fresh arrows. Their expressions were carved in stone. The woman stood beside them, every muscle tight. She didn't feel brave. She felt like someone walking to the edge of a cliff without knowing if anyone would catch her. The chief approached and looked at the young man. Stay calm, he warned. Men who ride with purpose can be unpredictable. The young man nodded. She noticed how his shoulders lifted slightly, as if he were preparing to carry the weight of whatever came next. When they finally began the walk toward the ridge trail.
Ow.
Her steps felt slow at first, but the young man stayed beside her, matching her pace. The forest around them grew dimmer as the sun sank, the air cooler, the shadows longer. Every sound made her flinch. Every rustle reminded her that danger was moving closer with every breath. The trail curved upward, giving them a view of the ridge again. The riders were no longer silhouettes. They had begun descending, moving with purpose, kicking up dust in a steady roar. Horses snorted. Leather creaked. Metal glinted faintly. The young man stepped forward until he stood slightly ahead of her. His uncle beside him, bow ready, but lowered. She stood right behind them, close enough to feel the heat of their presence. The riders reached the flat stretch before them and slowed to a halt. Their leader moved forward, a tall man with a long coat and a rifle slung across his back. He eyed the young Apache, then the woman, then the uncle. No smiles, no greetings, only cold intent. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the clearing like a blade drawn from its sheath. We're looking for the woman, he said. Her blood ran cold. The young Apache stepped forward. She is under our protection. The leader smirked. Protection? That's not how we heard it. Her breath caught. What did you hear? The young man asked. The leader leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes narrowing with a predator's focus. That she belongs to us, he said. Those words hit the clearing like thunder, twisting the air tight around them. The horses pawed the dirt. The Apache warriors shifted their footing. The woman felt the world closing in on all sides, and she knew with chilling certainty that whatever happened next would change everything. The words hung in the cool air like a storm that refused to break. The woman felt every heartbeat echo inside her ribs as the riders stared her down, waiting for her to crumble or run. She did neither. She stood behind the young Apache, trembling but rooted. And something inside her whispered to stay where she was. The leader tightened his grip on the reins. She belongs to us, he repeated, slower this time, as if saying it again would carve it into truth. The young Apache didn't move from his spot. His shoulders stayed squared, firm and protective. She belongs to no one, he said. Not even to me. The woman's breath caught at those words. In the face of danger, he didn't claim ownership. Instead, he claimed her freedom. That simple act carried more weight than any bargain or battle could. His uncle stepped forward, bow low but ready. State your reason for coming, the uncle demanded. The leader looked irritated that anyone dared question him. She ran from a debt, he said, and that debt must be paid. What? She did not run, the young Apache answered. She was sold. The leader smirked. Still the same thing in the end. No, the young Apache said, voice rising with conviction. She did not choose any of this. The riders exchanged looks, shifting uneasily. They hadn't expected a wall of resistance, much less someone speaking with such unwavering calm. The woman found her voice before she realized she was speaking. "I was sold without my consent," she said. "My stepfather traded me away. You had no claim on me. I owe you nothing." The leader turned his cold gaze toward her. "Maybe you don't owe me," he said, "but others do. And if we leave empty-handed, we'll collect payment in another form." His meaning was clear. Threat for threat. Fear for fear. The young Apache took another step forward. "If you try to take her by force," he said quietly, "you will answer to all of us." Behind him, more Apache warriors stepped out of the trees, silent as shadows, yet their presence filled the clearing. The riders froze as they realized they were no longer facing two men, but an entire valley of defenders. The village had rallied together, risking themselves for a woman who wasn't one of their own. The chief emerged among them, standing tall and steady. "You rode into our land without permission," he said. "You brought threats instead of reason. Leave now, and you will leave unharmed. Stay, and you will answer for your choices." The rider leader's eyes darted around. He counted the warriors. He calculated the risks. He was outnumbered, far from backup, and facing people who knew this land better than he ever would. The threatening confidence he carried before began to crack. At last he spat into the dirt and jerked his reins. "Fine," he said. "Keep her. She's not worth all this." He turned his horse sharply, motioning for his men to follow. Dust rose behind them as they retreated back up the ridge. Their figures grew small, then disappeared over the horizon, swallowed by distance and defeat. The clearing slowly exhaled. The warriors lowered their weapons. Children peeked from behind trees. Women hugged each other with relief. The tension that had wrapped around the valley like a rope finally loosened. The woman sank to her knees, overwhelmed by the weight of what nearly happened. The young Apache knelt beside her, steadying her shoulders with his hands. His touch was gentle, grounding, and real. "You are safe," he said softly. She looked up at him. "Because of you," he shook his head. "Because of all of us. No one faces danger alone here." His expression held no pride, only sincerity. She felt her heart warm with gratitude and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. The chief approached and looked between the two of them. "The valley chose to protect her," he said. "That makes her part of us now." The word surprised her. "Part of you?" she whispered. "If you wish it," the chief continued. "You may stay under our protection. Not as property." As a member of the valley, the young Apache watched her carefully, letting her choose without adding pressure. She thought of her past, of the home that had never felt like home, of the people who had turned their backs on her, of the emptiness she had carried for so long. Then she looked at these people who barely knew her, yet had stood between her. In danger, because it was right. She felt tears warm her cheeks. "Yes," she said. "I want to stay." A soft ripple of approval moved through the crowd. The young Apache's shoulders relaxed, relief filling his eyes. The villagers led them back down to the valley. She walked with them, feeling steadier with each step. When the sun reached the edge of the sky and the warmth of dusk settled over the land, the people gathered for a small meal to mark the danger that had passed. She sat by the fire, wrapped in the shawl the young girl had given her. The girl sat beside her, smiling proudly. "See," she said, "you are not a bird with tied wings anymore." The woman smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in days. "Thank you," she said, "for believing in me." The young Apache approached and sat across from her. The firelight flickered across his face, softening his strong features. He offered her a bowl of warm food, and when she took it, their fingers brushed. A gentle quiet settled between them. "I never asked your name," she said. He smiled faintly. "You were afraid. It was not the time. And now?" She asked. "Now is different." She nodded. "Then tell me." He spoke his name with pride, and she repeated it softly, liking the way it felt on her tongue. For the first time, she felt like she belonged to her life, not trapped by it. As the fire crackled, he finally told her more about his sister. How kind she had been. How her disappearance carved a scar in his heart. How he feared losing someone again. She listened, understanding now why he had looked at her with such guarded strength on that first night. He wasn't saving her out of pity. He was saving her because he refused to let history repeat itself. When the fire burned lower and the stars stretched across the sky, he walked her back to the shelter. This time, she wasn't afraid of the night. It felt like a blanket gently laid across the valley, safe and familiar. He paused at the entrance, not stepping inside, respecting her space as he always had. "You will not be alone here," he said. "Not ever again." She looked at him, the man who had changed the course of her life without asking anything in return. "I know," she whispered, "and I'm grateful." He nodded once, then turned to sit near the fire, keeping quiet watch as he always did. But tonight, his posture was lighter, his gaze less burdened. She realized that her choosing to stay had healed him too in some small way. Inside the shelter, she lay on the soft blankets and listened to the distant hum of village life. The wind rustled through the cedar trees like a gentle song. She felt safe, not because of walls or weapons, but because of people who stood by her with kindness and courage. Her story had begun with fear, loss, and a sense of being thrown away. But here, in this valley woven with trust and bravery, she found a place where her voice mattered, where her worth wasn't measured in coins or trades, where she was not owned, not silenced, but welcomed. When she closed her eyes, she felt her breath settle, steady and deep. The valley embraced her. The night watched over her. And she knew that whatever the future held, she would face it not as a burden, but as part of a community. The next morning, she stepped out into the sunlight with a quiet strength she hadn't known she carried. The young Apache looked up from the fire and met her eyes with a small nod. It wasn't a claim. It wasn't a demand. It was a promise. A promise that the past would no longer define her. A promise that choices were hers again. And a promise that, in this place, her heart finally had room to breathe. The story of a woman once sold ended not with chains, but with freedom, not with fear, but with belonging, and not with ownership, but with a bond built on respect, hope, and the quiet courage that grows when two people stand together against the world.